O malú chvíľu sa nám predstaví Samuel Barclay, je to americký architekt, ktorý pôsobí od roku 2006 v Indii. V roku 2013 spolu s manželkou Erikou založili architektonické a dizajnerské štúdio Case Design, ktoré má v súčasnosti rozpracovaných viacero projektov v Indii, Európe, v Afrike a aj na Strednom východe. No a súbežne rozvíja vlastnú remeselne zameranú nábytkovú značku Case Goods. Oplatí sa spomenúť aj projekt Avasara Academy pri indickom meste Pune, za ktorým stojí toto dizajnerské štúdio. Projekt je ukážkou architektúry s vysokou senzibilitou voči miestu, programu a klíme, zohľadňuje potreby komunity a predstavuje nezvyčajné útočisko pre mladé ženy, ktoré veria vo svoje právo na moderné vzdelanie. Krásna biografia a myslím, že to bude aj pútavé rozprávanie. I believe that we are in connection, Mr. Barclay. Are you with us? Tak určite sa dopracujeme aj k zvuku. Sme veľmi radi teda, že ste tu. How are you doing today? Mr. Barclay, we need to unmute. I think you must do this one. And now we are prepared. We can hear you. Perfect. So how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you very much.
We are happy that you join us. And where are you now? Are you in India?
I was in India yesterday, and I arrived back in Michigan with my family home last night.
And what time is it in Michigan?
It's just afternoon.
So we are happy and we are looking forward to hear your presentation. Vy, ktorí nás sledujete, vy určite teda využite tú príležitosť pýtať sa a sledovať nás online na Dňoch architektúry a dizajnu. So Mr. Barclay, we are listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely introduction, what I could gather from it, my limited language skills. But I want to thank the DAAD festival for inviting me and allowing us to participate and share our work, and especially to Alexandra for helping coordinate everything. I'm going to share my screen here. And let's see. Trust that this is, oops, one second. Apologies for that. Starting at the end. Okay, here we go. So yeah, a little bit about our practice. I'm an architect. I grew up in the US. I studied at SciArc in Los Angeles. And I moved to Mumbai after doing an exchange program during my master's. My wife and I moved there in 2006. We've been living and practicing there ever since. We kind of went for a couple of years and thinking we'd eventually come back, but just kind of fell in love with the life that we had there and the opportunities that we both had as practitioners. So we just continued to stay. We've got two beautiful children that were both born there, so it's really home for us. And during this pandemic, it's been a bit of a challenge. We came back to Northern Michigan to be closer to our parents. But yeah, we're looking forward to getting back to Mumbai as soon as we can. So the title of my talk today, as you can see, is The Craft of Collaboration. And for me, one of the things that's really important and the things that I've sort of come to realize through practicing, especially in a place that's kind of operates on so many deep kind of social and personal levels as India and Mumbai especially, is that collaboration in and of itself is a skill that requires kind of development, practice, a commitment to. And one of the things that I really came to fall in love with is the sort of depth of tacit knowledge and the kind of experience of artisans, craftspeople, the sort of deep understanding of materials and how they're put together, how they're utilized in different ways. Mumbai is this incredible maker space, not unlike Los Angeles, but manifested in very different ways, where at the same time you have cutting edge technology in terms of CNC prototyping and production, all of those kinds of things around the design industry, Bollywood, all of those different sort of modern amenities. But at the same time, you can still build the way that people did, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, through lime, through carpentry, the use of stone as a solid building material. And so for me, this notion of tacit knowledge that's, again, you can see here is rooted in context, experience, practice, and values. It's difficult to communicate, but it resides in the practitioner and is passed on through socialization and mentoring. So for me, as a sort of leader of our studio, one of the things that I take very seriously is that notion of teaching through practice, or engaging with not just the clients or customers, but also the practitioners, the people who are within our studio in terms of design work, but also those that we're collaborating with in terms of contractors and people that we work with. One of the best examples I could think of from that is this was a home that we were designing outside of Dubai a number of years ago, and we had sort of done the design, we'd worked with the clients, we built this sort of physical model in one of the workshops near Mumbai. And we took it to the site, and actually we were collaborating with these Afghani contractors who had come from sort of the mountainous regions. They were migrant workers, but they immediately had ideas about how this would be built. The home was sort of conceived in rammed earth, and we immediately got into this conversation with them, and they said, no, actually you need to build it this way. And they started literally building a physical model in terms of the construction technology, the materials, the way that they would come together. And so for me, it was really exciting to see that kind of engagement, even at a very sort of in a very unexpected place. Translating that back to the teams that we work with in India, half of our studio is sort of more like a standard studio or an atelier, and the other half is a physical workshop where a lot of production, a lot of things get made, not just for architecture, but we have a brand of furniture and lights as well. And so what I really love about that is that notion of, again, collaborating with the people who will be physically constructing it. These are both images that I love. The image on the left is myself having a conversation with the carpenters who we've worked with. I've known about 16, 17 years now. And the drawing in front of us that we're sort of discussing, and he's holding the pencil and the scale, talking about a window frame detail, but this is a drawing that he's made. It's on a 4x8 sheet of plywood. It's his drawing, it's masking tape, pen, pencil, chalk, all different kinds of things to kind of express layers, line weights, how water comes out, material expression, all those things. And the image on the right is a kind of a master mason that we've worked with. We were getting ready to start the school, which I'll share in a little bit. And we were having a conversation with the project manager, who comes from, kind of upper middle class family, highly educated, but of course didn't know how to construct a well. And so this sort of 70-plus-year-old mason is explaining to him and making drawings on his hand. And so I always get really excited with those kinds of exchanges and dialogues, and the kind of information that gets passed back and forth through those dialogues. What that has kind of led us to develop as a studio or as a practice is the way that we engage with these people. It's not a sort of Mumbai in India isn't a place necessarily where you make a thick kind of drawing stack, you issue it, that becomes a legal document. But it's a place where you can really engage in much less formal and kind of prescribed ways. And so we really have the opportunity to really deeply collaborate, where we spend time in the workshop with the carpenters, they come work in our space. Obviously, a lot of work gets done on site as well. And so one of the things that we've adapted at an early stage is to really get the people that will be physically constructing the building involved in the design process. And so as soon as we have a very early concept model, we get them on board, and the carpenters who will be, framing the house, or the masons who would be making it, we get them involved in collaborating with us to build the models. And so the carpenters that made this model with us in our studio, or we would send architects to their workshops, they know how each and every one of these joists is supported. They can count them. And so immediately you get a bill of quantities, and you can quantify the cost. You understand the amount of material that you need, how the things would be put together. And then eventually that translates into this kind of tool that contains not just an expression of architecture, but it contains the budget. It contains a way to convey to the client what their, how their aspirations might be met. You can engage with the landscape designer because they understand now how the ground needs to come and meet the building. And so you have this, we try and produce a lot of artifacts that enable us to have dialogues. And I find sort of very highly technical drawing sets, while sometimes critical, aren't always the best tool for that kind of engagement. As I mentioned, we work with a lot of carpenters, masons as well. A lot of these carpenters claim to go back 60 generations. Their fathers, kind of all worked through this method, through apprenticeship, through training and teaching. Again, none of it's written down. It's all word of mouth, but also not just word of mouth in terms of dialogue or communication, but also the art of practicing and the rigor that goes into producing something with your hands, and then having that be sort of evaluated and criticized and improved upon by your peers and your mentors ahead of you. And so you kind of work through that process. It's an exciting one for us. So how do we begin to engage with that? One of the ways, obviously, is through drawing and sketching, but very quickly you can see here on this image on the right, this is a quick sketch for a lock, a turnsnib for a door. That gets, take a photograph, WhatsApp, goes to the carpenter. A couple days later, a wooden prototype comes back. That's then checked for proportion, scale. How does it fit? How does it meet your hand? And then that would get turned into a brass piece. And so one of the real joys for us in our practice is that in certain projects, we get to go all the way down to the locks, the latches, the hinges, light fittings, all of those kinds of things. And out of that process for us, what I've really loved also is that we've, through an accumulation of projects, we've kind of developed this collection of, like I said, furniture, lights, objects, things that we've developed that might work for one or two projects or a certain circumstance or situation. But also we after having accumulated quite organically, just a certain number of them, we decided to kind of launch a brand. And so we've had this as our collection, or part of our collection. It's sort of continuously growing, but like I said, these things have come out of practicing. This folding chair that I showed just a minute ago, we were doing a cafe and we had to get, 10 chairs in less than half a meter. So each of these chairs folds down into 38 millimeters each. It folds completely flat and can be slipped into a very tight space so that the storage of them becomes quite simple. But at the same time, how can you work with a mechanical process? How can you work with craft? How can you work with the knowledge of materials that all of these artisans and craftspeople have? And so for us, that joy of developing that process is one that's quite rich and provides a lot of opportunities. A different kind of example of that is just recently we've been working with a young architect in our studio named Dwani Mehta, and she's been with us, I think, almost 5 years now, and she's had this passion she's worked a lot with color on a lot of the projects, which you'll see shortly, but she wanted to move sort of more in towards home goods or textiles and things like that. And so she had this notion of designing a set of carpets. India produces 90% of the world's jute. And so we started thinking, can we design this completely organic product that is handmade using this resource that's in abundance? We've got all the skill, all of the knowledge, all of the expertise. So can we use it design it to use natural fibers, be somewhat handmade, but also efficient in its production, but also as a vehicle to sort of support local communities and local crafts. And then to also add this layer of color to it, which was part of Dwani's passion as well. And so these are 100% organic plant-based pigments. Some of them are indigo, pomegranate peel, madder root. And so you get these different colors, yellows, blues, reds. And then obviously by mixing those or overlapping those, you start to get the secondary colors. This is Dwani here on the right. And so what she designed really was this technique of typically woven fibers are dyed first, and then, twisted fibers are dyed first and then woven into carpets. And what we wanted to do was actually look at, is there another way that we could do that, where you actually make the carpet first, and then through this technique of folding, twisting, wrapping, could you actually then take that and dip the material into the dye to create a somewhat of a different kind of experience that would be slightly different, but still within the realm of these kind of natural practices that go on. And so these were the results of early prototypes. We're still working out some of the colors, getting the evenness, getting the lines to be, the curves to be kind of in the right way and the right scale. These are literally just last week in our studio in Mumbai, so I'm really excited to share these here. In the same way, taking that notion of color, which is, as probably most of you know, is a really powerful driver of aesthetic in India, not just sort of in architecture and design, but really more sort of at the very grassroots level. This is a couple of images of the school that we're actually still building. It was our first project, but 7 years on, we're still seeing it come. It's for an NGO, and so it's a donation-based sort of economic model where we can kind of continue to build as those donations come in. But what was really exciting here was that Dwani worked with a color artist, actually a visual artist from Copenhagen named Malene Bach. You can see her here in this image. And again, for me, if there's sort of one image that captures kind of what we're about, it's this notion of Malene up on the scaffolding, working hand in hand, side by side with an artisan. These were a series of colors, an intervention that she made. The school had already, at least the first building of the school had already been constructed. We wanted to engage with a visual artist, not just to sort of, let's make some paint, but she really came in and had the idea for how these colors would be applied. She really liked the sort of simplicity of the concrete structure, and she said, let's just do the ceilings. And so all of the color interventions that occur are basically on this exposed concrete shell of series of structures. And then the ceilings are what she worked out in terms of the different, how the different spaces would work. And all the colors are made from locally available powdered pigments, which you saw in the couple of the previous images. They're mixed with jaggery, they're mixed with cement, they're mixed with water and a couple of sort of other binders to sort of create this kind of homemade paint that Malene and Dwani developed. And then each of those colors are calibrated to what the spaces are. So in the dormitories, it might be one thing, but even within that, the dormitories change from one side of the building to the other, relationship to the adjacent landscape. And so it becomes this kind of coding that weaves its way through the school, where girls start to identify, it's a school for young women, the girls start to identify color with their spaces, have a sense of ownership, a sense of wayfinding. And then again, that ties itself into the floor. So you can see here the mosaic floor at the bottom. These were salvaged wastage of marble. And so different colors come from different parts of India. Again, we worked very closely with Rameshwar Badwa, who's a mason that I've collaborated with for an extensive amount of time now. And he sort of brought up this notion of, well, we can go to stone quarries, we can go to shops, we can go to places where there's offcuts and wastage. And if we just collect them for the cost of transport, we can get them, these places will donate it basically for free. And so what that became then was not just his team, but our team as well, putting in a little bit of extra effort to find these things, to source these things, to figure out how they all come together, how they all work. But what you get is this unbelievable mosaic of different colors in different spaces that, again, contribute to the relationship. You can see the painted ceiling, you can see that the dormitory is different from the passage, that all of these kind of layers of complexity overlap and inform each other. Similarly, on the external paving, I was having a conversation again with Rameshwar, and I had shown him this image on the left. This is the steps to the Acropolis that Pikiones, the sort of well-known Greek architect, did. And I remember looking at his drawings and being so inspired how meticulous they were. Every single stone was drawn, every single pattern, every single piece. And sharing this with Rameshwar, I kind of said, how can we achieve this thing? Do you need me to make drawings? How do we do it for little to no money? Because the budget was extremely tight on this project. And what he said was, no, let's use, instead of marble, these are external spaces, we can use bigger tiles. Let's get karapa, which is kind of black limestone. Let's get granite. So much less color variation. It's all sort of darker shades of grays and things like that. But again, working with his artisans to sort of work out not necessarily a design or a pattern, but a way of working. And so you can start to see lines of grain. And so how does one person meet the next? And how is there some kind of continuity within that? But again, this design evolved through dialogue. There's no drawing for this. So unlike Pikiones, who made just meticulous drawings of every single stone, for us, this was much more a conversation. It was a way of problem solving, a way of, invoking, the kind of inherent talent that a lot of his artisans have, and really drawing on their experience, skills, and kind of emotional investment as well. They're all extremely proud of how these things came about. Another interesting part of the school, just so that it's not all, in terms of collaboration, it's not all artisans and craftspeople. For the same project, we worked with TransSolar, who's a climate engineering practice based in Germany. They also have an office in New York. And a number of years ago, much before this project was even a possibility, I had established a kind of relationship with one of the engineers, Pratik Raval. I had kept in touch with him after a project we were working on didn't pan out. And when we had this opportunity, I approached him and asked if he'd be interested. And working very closely with him, we developed this system of solar chimneys. I mean, it's not a new concept. It's the principles of it are kind of basic building physics, but the idea has been around for hundreds of years. And what you can see here is that effectively, if this is a cross section of the school, these are verandas on this side. You can see 4 dormitories here on the upper 2 floors, 2 classrooms here on the lower 2 floors. And effectively what happens is that the sun comes, shines on this concrete slab, which is encased in 3 sides with glass. That heats up the air at the top, which creates convection, which draws at the ceiling level, draws the hot air out of each classroom. And then what happens is that on the upper floors, just using, typical ventilation, doors and windows, and then on the lower floors, supplementing that with this series of earth ducts, what you do is you draw in the cool air at the floor level. And in this case, the northern side of the facade, the cool air comes in, it passes underneath the building and turns back, further cooling it, because obviously the temperature below grade would be much less than it would be outside exposed to the ambient temperatures. And then that comes in at the floor level. It mixes just using standard ceiling fans. And what we've been able to achieve with that is, with this very, very simple principle, again, using no mechanical systems whatsoever, there's not one air conditioner on the entire campus. We've been able to reduce the temperatures between 5 and 7 degrees centigrade, depending on sort of time of day, time of season, obviously. And yeah, again, save not just cost of construction in terms of purchasing mechanical equipment, but also save in terms of long-term operational costs, maintenance, utility bills, all of those kinds of things that would lend themselves, those savings would, obviously it's positive environmentally, which is obviously a huge goal as well, but it would just make the project economically viable in terms of the operation and upkeep for the school. You can see here, so the solar chimney here on the top, and then the classrooms. Part of that too was, again, with the building physics, was working out, having the exposed concrete slabs, the exposed stone floors. That thermal mass was critical to the operation of it. And so Pratik developed extremely intensive digital modeling tools using the physical geometry, the material specifications that we fed to him, but also the direction of the prevailing winds, the ambient temperatures and humidities in that valley various times of the year, and really entered all of that in. And he could tell us at 4:30 on a Thursday afternoon in July that this would be the anticipated temperature at the floor level, at eye level, and at the ceiling level of the space, what the relative humidity would be, and then to be able to, again, because personal comfort is not just based on temperature, it's based on temperature, air movement, humidity, and the kind of clothes that you're wearing as well. And so really collaborating deeply, really engaging with not just artisans and craftspeople, but really going into the science of these things and drawing on the expertise that all of these amazing people had. Again, coming back, this image always puts a smile on my face, coming back to kind of being able to practice in India and the kind of materials that we get the luxury to use. One of the things we wanted to do at the school was that, because we knew that this would be the first time living away from home for most of these young women, it's a residential school. And so we wanted to really try and introduce familiar elements, use wood as much as possible. Wood is quite an expensive material in India. And so what we found was that we could actually buy these reclaimed doors for effectively the same cost as buying a new aluminum frame, particle board, or some kind of highly fabricated contemporary synthetic material. We could buy these old Burma teakwood doors, which in a lot of cases actually came from old schools. The salvage market in India is incredible, and anytime a building gets taken down, every single element, all the way down to the brick and the sort of even the dust and debris gets reused for fill. And so this was a mock-up that we had made. And in the process of doing that, we were having a conversation with the head of school, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to need these bookshelves. Girls need to keep their bags." He said, "Can we just build some plywood cubbies, that would stand in front of the wall?" So we started thinking about it. We did a little bit of research on the budget. And what we found fairly quickly was that actually 40 millimeter thick slabs of marble were less expensive than plywood or particle board. And so if we could use that material integrated into the thickness of the wall, we would save space, we would save money. It's obviously more hygienic, more durable, easier to clean, less susceptible to vandalism and damage and all of those kinds of things. And at the very end of that very long list it's incredibly beautiful, at least in my opinion. And so to have this kind of richness and this kind of palette develop as the result of an intensive budget exercise was something that we were really proud of and really happy with the results on. You can see a lot of the materials, the mosaic here, the stone in the walls, Melena's colors are there. There's a few cases where we have applied it to the wall and sort of in one special place in each building. Some of the furniture that we've worked with, this is glass terrazzo made from recycled broken glass, gin, whiskey, beer bottles, things like that, but putting the kind of richness of that color to use. The bamboo screens also serve as quite an effective shading device, not just for sunlight and solar radiation, but from protection from wind, rains, privacy as well. And so you can see Obviously here, these are the models that we've developed at a very small scale. These are quite small pieces in our studio, but then again, working with, and actually this is the same person, you'll see his hands here again. So this is Malak Armama, the same gentleman who was designing the well with the project manager. And so this is actually his home, not too far outside of Mumbai. He developed full-scale prototypes, different patterns, different weaves. He also knew intimately how and when the bamboo needed to be harvested, different methods and techniques for cutting it, tying it, and then obviously ultimately how it would be applied to the facade. And so again, to have this kind of wealth and depth of knowledge, knowing that it existed, just really trying, you know, a huge part of the design was just simply finding the right person to work with, that we could kind of tap on the shoulder, engage in a dialogue, hopefully get them excited about it, so that they're putting in their best effort, which, you know, for a project like this, for the cause that it's for, it's a center for leadership, specifically for young women. And it was really easy to, everyone was so inspired by these young women to create a kind of, not just a home for them, but also to create a kind of very strong and robust academic institution. Was really amazing. So here you can see kind of, this is the entry court. There's a total of 6 buildings. This was partway through. You can see how it's all kind of come together. Really simple, you know, I call them decorated dumb boxes, but just these really simple concrete frames. We needed to cover an extensive amount of program in a very little amount of budget. And so just really relying on the kind of local building technology at this scale, but then how do we make that not become this kind of brutal, overwhelming institutional kind of feeling? And so this was the results of that. So we took kind of our knowledge and what we had learned from that experience in collaboration, and we were asked to do, partway through this, the school of Apsara, we were asked to design kind of collection, something between a little bigger than a collection of guest houses, a little smaller than a boutique hotel. But these 2 friends had approached us. They had a piece of land in Zanzibar, off the coast of Tanzania, in East Africa. And for those of you who know the area, it's the entire island is formed basically as this monolithic aggregation of, not aggregation, but this effectively a monolithic block of coral limestone that kind of rises up out of the sea. So this is our site. This is a view looking from the land at the ocean, and you can see the kind of coral reef go out. And then basically from standing at low tide in the ocean, looking up at the site. So where these trees are along this ridge is where the site is. But what was really unique about it, and you can kind of see it here, is that effectively the site was, because it was on the coast, there was almost no soil whatsoever. It had all eroded from the wind. What little scraggly plants were there were not really enough to sort of do anything with. And so one of the things we had to do really early on was to figure out the kind of landscaping strategy. From a construction point of view, we worked with almost exclusively with local builders. This is Simona, who's obviously now a great friend of ours, but he worked in our studio for about a year. He's an Italian architect. He worked in Mumbai for about a year and then moved to Zanzibar and was on site for 2 years to see this construction through. And so the buildings themselves, which are, again, are quite simple, very basic, rudimentary concrete frame structures, columns, beams, slabs, cantilevered staircase. They're clad in this local coral limestone. Again, it's not coral from the sea, but it's actually just, I mean, you walk down the road and you can pick up a piece of it. It's what the locals use. They crush it and they make driveways and roads out of it. It's almost quite a few of the buildings, at least the historical buildings, are made using the same material. And so looking how we can incorporate that in a contemporary context. before we got to that point, as I mentioned, the entire site was effectively barren. And so the very first thing that we did, this is the client here on the left, Shehab, and this is this, I always describe him as our crazy German permaculturalist. This is Franco. And we met him, Shehab and I had kind of gone around the island doing a little bit of research, checking out other projects. And somebody recommended that we get in touch with Franco because he'd be able to help us somehow. We didn't quite know what or how. We kind of knew he had something to do with landscape, but weren't quite sure. So he's trained as a chef. He's been he kind of escaped East Germany, literally escaped East Germany before the wall came down, and has really been madly in love with Africa ever since. And so he was trained as a chef and he worked in restaurants, but he kind of developed this passion for permaculture. And so now what he does is he runs a Permaculture Institute. This is the school that he's built. And then these other 4 images of our site. And so what we did was we actually had to go through this process of literally growing soil, where you can, okay, what is the most hardy plant that grows the fastest, that produces the most biomass for the least amount of water. And so we would put in bananas, and we would put in different kinds of peas that would fix nitrogen, and things that would grow, and sort of this technique he would describe as chop and drop. So you would grow something fast, cut it down, mulch it, let that kind of create this compost, mix that with, one of the things he wanted to have very quickly was a chicken house. So mix that with chicken manure and the cuttings from the kitchen and all these different things. And so very, very quickly, he was able to achieve this amazing, very verdant landscape, which had initially been quite barren. And so this was going on in parallel with the construction of the buildings. Again, not knowing anything about permaculture, not knowing anything about local or regional practices for landscape. This was something that really came out of intensive research in that place, and obviously this collaboration. We were fortunate, again, the client was quite interested in color, not just for its sort of relevance in local culture in East Africa as well, but also their interests personally. So we kind of encouraged him to send Milena a plane ticket. So Milena came from Copenhagen again. I always joke this image on the right. So the color of the wall is what happens when you leave color in the architect's hands. And then obviously Milena, you can see some of the colors that she's been working on. So this was the color that I designed, this sort of very boring architectural gray. But once Milena came on board, we got excited and kind of ran with it. And again, similar technique that is done in other parts of the world. This is a technique that's done in India. It's basically mixing pigments, ground powdered pigments with water and cement, and applying that as a screed. Whereas Avstra had been more of a paint, this was much more of a integral color to the pigment. Integral to the cement. And so this became part of, it's a colored plaster using local powdered pigments that we could find in the market, things that we could, develop colors that were relevant to the sort of social context there, the colors of the landscape, relationship to the water. And so you can see how the palette shifts based on all of these very different parameters. And then how that applies to the interiors. And so you get these very smooth, soft, slightly mottled colors for the interiors that provide a really nice softness as opposed to the kind of hard outer shell of the facades. You can see how that mixes with this kind of very beautiful salmon kind of coral color on the facades. The same coral limestone you get in different parts of the island, which is much more of a kind of off-white, kind of creamy, buttery kind of color. So it really depends on it's the same stone, the same material, it just depends on what kind of mineral deposits are in that area. And so really trying to work with local masons, local farmers, people who had knowledge of these different materials and different experiences. And then what we did to sort of tie all that together, because there were places where, you know, the masons had really primarily worked with this one kind of material. The coral is quite soft. It was a limestone. And there were places where we need something a little bit harder, a little bit tighter, if I can put it that way. And so there were places where the clients really wanted to use a kind of a granite material that we had sourced from India. And in order to do that, we brought two masons from Mumbai. They're actually originally from Rajasthan, but they came with me from Mumbai. One who had expertise in the plaster technique that I just explained, but the other one who was incredibly knowledgeable working with stone, and particularly granite. And so there were times when we were, you know, a lot of people on the island know Italian, so Simona was speaking to people in Italian. There were other, you know, some people only spoke Swahili. The Masons were Marwadi, so they would speak their local language or Hindi, and then my English and a little bit of Italian and a little bit of Hindi, and trying to sort of put all these things together. But a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of gestures and a lot of just learning and sketching on the back of a slab of granite and wearing out pencils and things like that really became this rich dynamic. This was, again, nearing completion, looking out towards the water. It's since been finished, and we're trying to get back and get some completed pictures. But obviously, in today's climate, that's been challenging. On the same island, again, this time for Franco, he really kind of fell in love with the way that we engaged with him and the way that we talked about design and working. And so he and his wife, Bernadette, who is also a very deep collaborator on the project, also with the permaculture. They asked us to design a home for them. And so these are a few images of that. We're just getting started on the foundations, but we were really inspired by the local vernacular and the idea of the barasa, which is this kind of public seating space that's very much integral with the porch and the entry to the house. But also there are a lot of projects that had a courtyard design. So the image on the left is a model that we had made, and on the right is the local village house. And one of the things we wanted to do was to actually see if we could produce a low-cost model that could be a prototype for other places, either in Zanzibar or Tanzania, or possibly even further afield from there in Africa, but to do that without using any cement. And so because the island is literally made up of coral limestone, they have, for thousands of years, used this process of lime mortar and lime plaster. And it's obviously less prevalent these days because of the infiltration of cement and contemporary industry and all of that. But that you can still find this is a local lime kiln. These are the slaking tanks. What we really loved about that process, in addition to obviously the environmental impact, lime produces less air pollution than the production of cement because it burns at a much lower temperature. But the fact too that we could do it with local knowledge and know-how and experience was enticing. But in addition to those things, the thing that really attracted me was this notion that because the site itself was effectively a monolithic piece of solid limestone, we would then lay solid blocks of limestone with lime mortar, and then finish that with a lime plaster. The entire thing, including the ground itself, would revert to, simply by changing the state of the material and constructing it in a particular way, as that lime cured and effectively calcified, the entire thing would become monolithic again. And so there's a really powerful kind of experience in that I think once this house is constructed, that would actually be experienced. It's a very simple courtyard house, as I said, kind of inspired by the local vernacular, but also through this practical need that we were asked to achieve, which was they wanted to have the entire house completely off the grid. And so the way the rainfall happens in Zanzibar, we were able to calculate that we could collect all the water that the house would need throughout the year, just from the roof itself. And so effectively what happens is all the roofs slope inward. If you go back to the plan, you can see there are these kind of little corner cutouts for courtyard bathrooms and one service space here, but all the roofs slope inward. So all the rainwater collects in this courtyard. And then that passes through a series of filters and is stored in this underground cistern, which again is effectively just an excavation in the rock. And then that's lined with blocks and lime and waterproof plaster, again, hydrated lime, to effectively achieve the water needs for the entire house: kitchen, drinking, bathing, toilets, everything that you would need throughout the year. We did all the calculations, again, based on the kind of weather map. Fortunately for Zanzibar and Tanzania, as climate change continues to sort of run rampant, Tanzania has actually been getting more and more rain every year. So it's one of the places that, at least in that regard, in terms of accumulation of water, may benefit from this change. And there's solar panels on the house. The water heaters are all solar, are generated through solar radiation. And so this house will be reed bed filtration for the septic system. This house will be completely off the grid with no need for external mechanical systems. This is a photograph taken of the model actually on the site itself. They have a sort of a 1 acre plot just up the hill from the ocean. Then the last project I want to show is kind of one that we've been working on now for a couple of years. It kind of stops and starts, and again, it's tied to the economy, and obviously now with COVID, it's kind of paused for a second again. But this is a sports academy with a sort of focus in football in Goa. Goa is one of the states in India that was actually a former Portuguese colony as opposed to a British one. And their passion for football is unparalleled in India. In India, there's cricket, and then there's everything else. Football is a kind of very, very distant second or third with hockey, field hockey. But it's kind of growing in popularity. They've started a sort of a Premier League there, and one of the teams approached us about building not just a training facility for athletes, but also dormitories, a school where they could really kind of an international school where they could have sort of excellence, not just in academics, but also in health, fitness, a general kind of well-being environment. And so again, looking at local materials, this is laterite. This is a kind of something between soil and rock. And effectively, you see the way that it's being cut in these kind of massive blocks. It's quite soft when it's in the ground relative to stone, but once you take it out, and it's exposed to the air, it actually hardens and does become a quite a viable building material. A lot of Goan architecture uses this material in place of brick. And again, our site, this is not a photo from the site, but our entire site has this kind of hilly terrain. And the parts where we would need to make excavations to accommodate the football fields, we can actually get free building material from that. And so what we worked out was this kind of system of balancing the cut and fill, trying to accommodate the program, but also trying to use the land in a way that it actually benefited our not just our budget, but also the architectural design in a way that really integrated the project into the site itself. Again, trying to instill one of the client for the project was very passionate about these kind of not just net zero buildings, but net positive buildings. And so all of those cycles of rainwater harvesting, polishing ponds in terms of filtration, reed bed filtration, septic, how those things would work. One of the things I forgot to mention about Avsara is that 100% of the water that's used for the landscape there comes from the water that is goes down the drains in the school. And so anytime somebody washes their hands, flushes a toilet, takes a shower, that water gets filtered through reed beds, that goes to a polishing pond, that then gets pumped up the hill and gets circulated and irrigated into the landscape. And so using those principles and those learnings, again, a lot of it is a combination of ancient technology, more recent technology, local practices of production and farming, trying to sort of look at all of those and pick and choose kind of best practices from each kind of venue, and then put them all together to integrate that into the campus, so that you not only have a place that's hopefully happy and healthy for these people to occupy, but it's also productive. It's making its own food. Obviously, the sort of wellness in terms of the kind of air filtration that plants can provide and all of those kinds of things contribute to all of it, but trying to look at the entire thing holistically in a way that integrates and benefits all of these different aspects. So these are some, obviously models and renderings for that. And we hope that we're going to be taking this to the next stage. I think, once things settle down with the economy, we should be in a better place. And then I wanted to kind of tie everything up with actually a quote. A sort of friend and a mentor of mine. I've known her, I think, about 20 years now. Billy Sin is an architect. She's based in New York. She and her partner, Todd Williams, run a practice called Todd Williams and Billy Sin, and they're actually the architects for the Obama Presidential Center. Billy was recently in Mumbai, I guess about a year ago, and she gave a talk at a conference about women in design. And at the end of it, she closed her talk with something that really resonated with me. And she said, we've built a practice that does not rely on strategy, but rather on a set of core values. And that really struck me as kind of this notion of not knowing necessarily where you're going, but as long as you have these kind of guiding principles and you hire young designers and you choose clients and you engage in projects and you work with collaborators, as long as the people that you're working with and collaborating with, not just helping you with the design work, but also the people that you're serving, as long as there's an alignment of those values, for me, that's the biggest tell of whether something is going to be successful. And so, I just wanted to say that I was really inspired by that notion. We've tried to really build our practice around that idea. And then the other kind of under the radar thing I wanted to slip in here is that if you or any of your friends are in the US or have any influence in the US, please make sure that you go out and vote on Tuesday. It is absolutely essential that we fix the mess that we're in. So I thank you for your time, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Tak to bol Samuel Barclay na Dňoch architektúry a dizajnu. Samuel, first of all, I would like to thank you. It was amazing and very informative presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And if you don't mind, there are some questions from our viewers. During the collaboration with carpenters and masons, what depth of drawing detail do you provide them? Do you rely on their craftsmanship and knowledge, so they kind of improvise?
It's everything. There are some projects where we make really intensive, explicit, detailed drawings, but I really try and avoid those. The thing that I learned very early on, I worked my first 7 years in India, where I was working with Bijoy Jain at Studio Mumbai. And one of the things that I learned in that process was the kind of the democracy of a pencil or a pen. And so as soon as you have a drawing that's in somebody's book or it's on a piece of paper and you start scribbling over it, and then you like set it on the table and they pick it up and they start scribbling on it, it just facilitates, it's egalitarian in some way, and it's a kind of great equalizer. Whereas if you're simply handing them a CAD drawing and telling them to make this thing, it's almost, not only does it feel like it's a foreign language, but it feels almost unapproachable in some ways, even if they understand it intimately. And so we really try and work hard to kind of break that barrier and encourage people to be engaged and invested, not just intellectually, but emotionally as well. And so we try and, I always tell people on my team, let's make objects, artifacts, samples, mock-ups, drawings, whatever it is, that leave enough space that aren't so explicit that nobody has room to enter. And so that works at all scales. You know, Milena coming in and making a color intervention in a nearly completed building, in the same way as sort of making a rudimentary sketch about how two pieces of wood might be joined. Really enabling and encouraging people to engage in that process has really paid dividends for us.
Thank you for your answer. And can you, Samuel, close your presentation? We would like to see you
Absolutely.
again. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Perfect.
How's that?
And why did you decide to work in India? Tell us, please.
It wasn't intentional. It wasn't predetermined. I literally went for one semester as a graduate student from Los Angeles. I met Bijoy there. I just kind of fell in love with the way that he was practicing and the way that people could practice there, the kind of materials and the kind of relationship to people that you could collaborate with. And when he called me after I graduated and offered me a job, my wife and I just kind of said, when else are we going to do this? We thought we'd be there for a couple of years, and it's, you know, this is our 15th year living there, so it's home now.
Samuel, we're wishing you all the best. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thanks.
Dámy a páni, Samuel Barclay, americký architekt, ktorý pôsobí v Indii v programe Dní architektúry a dizajnu. Verím, že ste si toto rozprávanie užili, naozaj mimoriadne inšpiratívne zábery a postrehy priniesol do nášho programu.